Hi, friends. Thank you for joining me today for the live show. I'd like to begin today reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 3, starting at verse 19. This is the judgment that the light has come into the world, and men loved the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But he who practices the truth comes to the light, so that his deeds may be manifested as having been wrought in God. The reason that I started with that passage of scripture, friends, is that the political intrigue that has swallowed Washington, D.C., is, in my opinion, a result of many people beginning to shine a light of truth into those dark places. And as is true in nature, the light makes the cockroaches scatter. However, today is not a time to sit back and rest. Instead, it's a time to press into the corruption that is, by and large, American politics with the truth and let the chips fall where they will. I'm joined today by author and award winning journalist Diana West. Diana, welcome back to Dr. Mike Live.
Oh, wonderful to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, before we jump into a discussion, by the way, folks, we're going to be discussing Diana's book, American Betrayal: Secret Assault on Our Nation's Character. And I would encourage you to go out to Amazon and find this book. Diana, can they get this on your website, which, by the way, is dianawest.net? Is this book
Yeah.
available on your website?
Yes, I have links to all my works at my website. So, yes, straight through to Amazon or Audible. The book is also available as an audiobook. So,
Oh, fantastic.
you know,
So, so the last time you were on, um, Diana, we discussed your book, The Red Thread, and fantastic book, by the way. This book, American Betrayal, um, actually, and again, I want to bring something else up before we jump into discussion of it. But when this book was released, it created a firestorm of of pushback. Might I even say criticism, to the degree that you even wrote a rebuttal. You
yes,
wrote a rebuttal to those critics, didn't you?
I did. I had to. There were so many lies and calumnies told about what was inside the book that I was advised by counsel, literally, that I needed to refute every single one because the internet, of course, everything lives forever. So I wanted to have that defense out there so people could follow along. And I'm so glad I did.
Yes, absolutely. So, folks, I would encourage you to get those books. But before we jump into that, Diana, I noticed on your website, again, dianawest.net, that last week on consecutive days, both Wednesday, July 24th and Thursday, July 25th, you posted articles related to the uh, Mueller testimony before the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees.
Yes.
Um, so, is it fair to summarize this as one more very lame attempt at diverting attention from the fact that they've got nothing, little more than sleight of hand, and maybe that's being too kind?
Well, yes, it is being too kind because I think what is missing from the whole conversation about what happened last week and what's happened to us as a country for the past 2, 3 years is we've been living inside a giant fraud. And that fraud is that there is evidence to even begin an investigation into Trump Russia collusion, so called, because the only evidence that exists comes from the Democrats themselves. It comes from a couple of documents. The report by a private firm the Democrats hired to look into their claim that Russia hacked their server and turned over emails, embarrassing and incriminating emails to WikiLeaks. This is the whole crux of Trump Russia and the whole crux of the notion that somehow there was something illegitimate about that election. That whole charge is based on nothing that would ever stand up in court, nothing that our FBI has done, any other investigating agency, any independent agency. This is literally a Democratic contractor who made these claims, and the Comey FBI, the British CIA, and the rest of it, they accepted it. They wanted it to be true. So, in other words, the FBI never looked at the DNC server. The Department of Homeland Security never did. The Office of Naval Intelligence, and on down the line of whatever investigative bodies we have, nobody looked at it but a Democratic firm. This is the exact same flip side of what we all know more about in terms of the so-called Steele dossier, which continues these scurrilous charges, which again go right back to the Democrats themselves. This is not evidence. So the whole premise of what we've been going through, and I was very disappointed and dismayed that the Republicans did not make this clear to the people, is a giant fraud. This is a fraud. We are being forced to live inside a fake alternate reality that is based on DNC junk. And that's
Dude,
the best way I can put it.
yeah, and the message here is it originally was um, Trump Trump colluded with the Russians to hack the DNC. They were in cahoots together. Now it's become, well, Russia interfered in 2016 on behalf of Donald Trump. So they're trying to reshape the message, repackage the message, and that still doesn't hold any water, does it?
No, it doesn't, but it's very pernicious because going forward, we still have that as kind of the way we are supposed to look back at 2016. There's something wrong with Donald Trump's election, and it is nonsense is not a strong enough word. It is a fraud, and again, it's traceable right back to these DNC fraudulent documents. It's how can it be that the Senate, the Congress, well, the media, but everyone else in public life has just sort of accepted the notion that the DNC did not permit the FBI to examine its server. I mean, think about it. They've made this incendiary charge that actually is very serious because it involves a foreign adversary. It involves a hostile cyber attack on our national election. I mean, this is not just beanbag. This is very serious stuff. It's geopolitically serious. And yet, when the FBI comes knocking, they say, oh no, we've got it covered. I mean, imagine a bank robbery and the police show up at the door and the bank president says, no, I've got a report. I hired a firm to look into who did it. And here it is. And then the police say, okay, no problem. And then everything follows from that. So think about how serious this is in terms of being a big lie. And when you bring up American Betrayal, my book that came out in 2013, this book really is a history of the big lie in the 20th century, in American politics, in American history, and how we are still suffering because so many lies have been told. And those words from John that you opened the program with, they actually form the epigraph to American Betrayal, because so much of this is about hiding in darkness and trying to turn toward the light. I mean, it really is a story of light and dark in literal, every kind of term.
And Dinah, your book, American Betrayal, it really does destroy, well, how can I term this? The approved versions of history that we've all been led to believe is true, because you expose the reality of what happened to it. And this was even before World War II, this kind of subterfuge was going on in our government. So maybe this is a good place to start discussing this. You opened your book with an introduction titled The Beginning. and you you show folks with names and dates and government officials and departments and what exactly was happening. Soviet Union communists had already infiltrated American government to the degree that they then had the freedom to begin moving agents around in our various departments, including the State Department. Isn't that true?
Absolutely true. Now after we've had these intervening years, I look back at this beginning as really the beginning of what we are all sort of understanding now as the swamp or the deep state. This was the subversion of our government, the infiltration of our government in this explosion of agencies that we did see in the 1930s as Franklin Roosevelt's long term in office begins. The government expands to almost, modern levels, certainly comparatively to the way the government ran before. It's expanded ever since, but we first get this notion of massive government control in the Roosevelt years. And we see the Soviet Union, we see communists, pro-Soviets, actual agents, socialists, fellow travelers, and the rest entering this massive expansion of government as part of what's called the New Deal. And why is that important today? Have you heard of the Green New Deal? I mean,
Mhm.
these things don't just go away. They're not things we learn in 11th grade and have to forget about. This is connected to our daily lives. The effort to socialize, to communize America has been about a century long, and it begins in earnest in the 1930s. I mean, it was before, but really it gets this huge boost in the early 30s when you see Franklin Roosevelt first recognize the Soviet Union. Because remember, the Russian Revolution wasn't very old at this point. It was 1917. That's only, it's less than about a dozen years later, we see Franklin Roosevelt actually give diplomatic recognition to this revolutionary regime that had already killed so many people, including, of course, the ruling family, the czars, gone through various purges, starved millions of people. I mean, we already had a Holocaust on our hands in terms of at least 6, 7, 8 million people starved to death by the state, by Joseph Stalin, in the so-called terror famine in the Ukraine. This was an effort to seize private farming and collectivize it for the state. And the people who farmed it were inconvenient and had to be destroyed. And so they were by the millions. Even with this happening, and the world did know about it, this wasn't a big secret, even though people pretended it wasn't happening, America decided to normalize relations with this bloody regime. And that would be, I think, the most important date Americans do not know, which is November 16th, 1933. This was the moment when I think America really starts going down in terms of a moral compass. It throws the moral compass into the sea by assuming you can normalize relations with this incredibly abnormal regime, which was openly dedicated to bringing every other country in the world down and turning it communist. So how great an idea was that? And notice we had gone through 4 presidents before Roosevelt who refused to do this because they understood you couldn't make a deal with this kind of revolutionary hostile adversary. So a lot of our troubles begin with this, but what it did in terms of the mechanism of subversion is it normalized communism. And so you see people entering government secretly, or known as, called them parlor pinks. Those were the big socialists, the New Dealers, people who are going to take the government and collectivize, plan the economy, centrally plan the economy. And these are the ideas that we see Ocasio-Cortez and the other Bernie Sanders and all the presidential candidates on the Democratic side actually still pushing decades. I mean, this has been a long march, and it begins here. The trail was an eye-opener for me because, of course, I hadn't been taught this as a student in college or high school either. So the whole thing has been a great shock to the system of both me as the writer and everyone who reads it.
Mm. Yeah, and just to show you how powerful these folks are in our government, um, I think the boldest move to date that they've made, in spite of everything they've tried to pull on Trump, is the election of Barack Obama. In chapter one, you've got a great line in here, Diana, where you say, even beyond the question of how Americans elected a man incubated in a radical comfort zone peopled by Stalinists, Maoists, card carrying communists, socialists, and postmodern revolutionaries, unhelpfully obscured as Alinskyites. That's a great line right there. What
Thank
they're
you.
talking about Barack Obama,
Yeah.
and at least in my lifetime, this is probably the boldest, most arrogant, in your face move that the people you're talking about have made, because his background in history, it was there for anybody to see, but the corporate owned media buried it, suppressed it, refused to discuss it, and so it became a non-issue.
Right. Remember, Obama was going to be our post-partisan president. I mean, what a laugh. But
Yes.
look where we were in 2008, 2009, 10 years ago, when you couldn't use the word socialist.
Yeah.
And this was, I've found this out up close and personal because at the time I was commenting on the election of, the election season. It was John McCain, Barack Obama in that cycle. And I was going on CNN once or twice a week in the old Lou Dobbs show. And after Joe the Plumber, people remember 2008, we had October, Joe the Plumber, a man on a line in Ohio, actually asked Obama about his policies. And Obama tells him, well, we just think it's better if you spread the wealth around for everyone, which is just shorthand for socialism. If the government is spreading wealth, that means the government is redistributing wealth, that
Yep.
taking from some and giving to others. And when Joe the Plumber brought this up live on camera, this was something that became absolutely the press's just mantra was to destroy Joe, to find out if he had a plumber's license, to find out, what his marital situation was. I mean, instead of actually taking what Obama said and discussing whether he was indeed going to bring socialism in the United States, they attacked Joe the plumber. And when I brought this up on CNN shortly before the election, I got slammed for being a red baiter, which was a term I had never heard before. This was one of the other guests, somebody who was from the Hillary Clinton orbit in New York. And I had not heard the term before. I gathered what it meant. I mean, I vaguely had heard it. But in some ways, this was the beginning of my research in American Betrayal, because I realized this was supposed to be a conversation ender. And the fact was, yes, Barack Obama's power foods, healthcare, what he did with industry, banking, and all the rest of it was socialist. It didn't matter that George W. Bush was doing the same thing. I mean, we have to look at both sides of the spectrum here to understand where we are. But again, we weren't allowed to discuss it, and I wasn't invited back onto CNN before the election. I don't think that's by accident. And when we go 10 years forward to today, well, socialism is everywhere because the left has made it okay. We have Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and all the rest of them talking about democratic socialism, so-called. And so it is a moment. We can at least take advantage of that. But on the other hand, we're one election away. If any of those Democrats get in, we are absolutely one election away from complete and total socialism. And it's Donald Trump is that last block on this happening to us. And this is part of the reason why we're in this very dire position. They realize also the flip side of that is that he is also, I believe firmly, the most anti-communist president we have ever had. And so he represents a threat, the biggest dire threat to the whole socializing project, which again has been moving forward for a century, that's ever been. We've never had a national politician with charisma, with support, and of course he won the White House on his election, who actually wanted to reconstruct the nation state in a free market, individual liberty way. I mean, this absolutely blows up everything and perhaps rouses the people, I hope, in 2020 once more. So this is kind of explains the crisis. And when you look at American Betrayal and also Red, which you kindly mentioned, this is trying to look at what's really going on in terms of arming ourselves with the understanding of how long we've been played and how important the stakes are today. Long project began long before Barack Obama, deeply embedded into all of our institutions, and this is why it is such a difficult task to actually drain the swamp and restore America, and why it will take at least another term for President Trump to do so.
Yes, yes, that's right. Now, being censored for trying to expose the communists in our ranks is nothing new, is it? In fact, I think we touched on this just briefly the last time we chatted, Diana. And your friend, Stanton Evans, wrote a fantastic book called Blacklisted by History: The Untold Story of Senator Joe McCarthy. He was spot on, but he was stopped in his tracks, wasn't he?
Well, yes and no. He was attacked by many of the same creatures that attacked me later, because in many ways, American Betrayal, well, in every way, I could not have written American Betrayal had I not read Blacklisted by History. You know, people always ask that question, you know, what is the book that shaped your outlook or really had an impact on you? And I would say, you know, after all my years in journalism and living, I would say that that book had more of an impact on me in terms of changing the way I saw history, politics, journalism practiced. You know, in terms of trying to create a new school of journalism, it would be the first book I would offer young people, old people too, because what Stan Evans does there is he goes back to the records. He does detective work. It's tireless. It is in archives. It's not secondary and third tertiary sources. This is the real deal. The congressional testimonies, the FBI declassified files, the newspapers of the day, the memoirs of the, I mean, these were the same kinds of sources that I looked at, and then in American Betrayal, copied how Stan did it and expanded the, the horizon. My book is much broader in scope than Blacklisted by History, but again, it rests on Blacklisted by History because what Stan did was he overturned the conventional wisdom, the court history, the narrative. He overturned the whole perception of Joseph McCarthy as simply the worst man who ever lived in American history, the most reviled, hated man who just, you know, you can't say enough bad things about him. And that goes on both sides of the spectrum. And Stan overturns that. And I was so dazzled by this tour de force that I literally wondered, well, what else is wrong out there? Because if this is wrong, when did we start getting things so wrong? Is it with Senator McCarthy's life in the 1950s? What happened before that? Well, what happened before that? And so I started peeling the onion and decided to really begin in the early 1930s when Franklin Roosevelt comes to town, and we see the creation of really the swamp itself. We see this branch of government rise, this unelected, bureaucratic, faceless branch of government that just takes over. And we find out over the years that many of them were literally taking orders from Moscow, or were in support of global government, or wanted to see socialism in this country. So we're seeing the same kinds of things and patterns today, but unfortunately, we've been deprived of this history. This is lost history. And I truly believe that you cannot have anti-communism without also having Joseph McCarthy. And what we've seen the right do is excise McCarthy from itself and from anti-communism. And this is not just wrong and a great slander on a great American patriot, but it also ruins anti-communism. It makes it very hollow. And I can't emphasize that enough. And if you look at my critics on American Betrayal, this is really what they're all about. They are all about keeping anti-communism from reunited with Joseph McCarthy and the many other fantastic elected officials that America sent from across the country to Washington to try to drain that swamp in the late 1940s and 50s. What we are taught wrongly is a red scare, as if it's some kind of joke,
Yeah.
some kind of fantasy. No, these elected officials, Democrats and Republicans, senators and congressmen or representatives, they worked so hard and conducted so many investigations. It is pure gold, the archives that they left us, these hearings in both houses, which I actually, as a legacy of Stan, I possess now a lot of these bound hearings that are available in congressional repository libraries, but are a little inaccessible. You can also find a lot online now, which is great, but they're kind of hard to understand at first. Anyway, this record is where we have to go back to find our way, I believe, because this has been such a problem of dire threat for so many decades, and now we're seeing it again. And so, how does this relate to Trump Russia? Well, it relates very closely because when you look at the people, and we talked about this in regard to the red thread, which is the subtitle, it's a search for ideological drivers inside the anti-Trump conspiracy.
Yeah.
A lot of these people who are trying to take down President Trump and pretending Russia hacked the election and made him illegitimate, well, it turns out a lot of them began life very far left on the spectrum, including communism, socialism, following in the footsteps of these same people back in the day who changed our government, who subverted our system. And many of them were enthralled to Stalin, to world communism, global government. I mean, it continues, and these people often have mentors that also go back to the day. So this is a continuous thread, if you will. It's a continuous assault on our nation's character, and it's really time to wake up because it's coming. I mean, election day is coming in 2020, and this is the big one.
Yes, yes, that's right. Friends, I'm talking with Diana West, author and award winning journalist, about her book, American Betrayal: The Secret Assault on Our Nation's Character. Now, when we come back from the break, folks, I'm going to throw a name out there that I will wager most folks are not familiar with, because there was actually someone that preceded Joe McCarthy in trying to reveal this, and he also was not recognized. And I'm talking about Whitaker Chambers. So when we come back from the break, we'll pick it up there, building this foundation, moving forward to the swamp that we see in DC right now. Jared, let's hear from Life Vantage. And Kathy, after the break, let's take questions from social media, and then we'll take questions from the queue.
Healthy living through LifeVantage. Scientific research has validated oxidative stress as the root cause of aging and most disease. Oxidative stress is the result of the production of free radicals at the cellular level that damage our bodies. Protandim reduces free radical damage by 40% in 30 days. It does this by triggering the body's intelligence, activating the NRF2 protein, which in turn produces its own powerful protective antioxidant enzymes. LifeVantage Protandim, NRF1 and NRF2 work together to enable your body to rejuvenate itself on a massive scale, whether by upregulating your genes' ability to produce their own antioxidants, your cell's ability to produce mitochondria, or your digestive system's ability to regulate bacteria. We're helping you stay on top of the aging process while delivering the mental clarity and overall well-being you need every day to get the absolute most of your life. More information is available at www.abcgotit.com/MIKA68. www.abcgotit.com/MIKA68.
Hi, friends. Thanks for supporting our sponsors, Life Vantage. Kathy, are there any questions for Diana on our platforms?
I have one.
Okay.
Johnny Lee is asking, what does she think will be the final closure to this investigation? Does she think Barr will find anything against the Democrats?
Well, that's a great question. And if I were betting, I would say we're not going to get what we need from Attorney General Barr. I'm not someone who is encouraged. I'm willing to be surprised, however, but when you go back and see his record working for George H.W. Bush, coming out of the CIA, this seems to me a very deep state beginning. And I haven't been happy with his assessment of Russian interference in the campaign. This, to me, is the big tell. Anybody who tells you that there's proof that Russia hacked the election for Donald Trump is not telling you the truth, because there isn't evidence. We know the FBI and all the other government agents, nobody investigated it. We only have the Democrats' word. So he is one of those people who is backstopping that big lie. To me, that's a big lie. So I'm nervous or leery of what he may ultimately give us. I think we'll get sort of perhaps a halfway of, something, but not. I don't believe we're going to see him be the one who actually drains this swamp. But again, I'm happy to be proven completely wrong, but I feel like he's not the one to do it because he's too much of the deep state.
Good answer.
We're going to continue to waste taxpayer money all the way through 2020 then.
Well, yes, I mean, kind of running out the clock. I've heard, the internet today was buzzing with this notion that on Wednesday we're going to see some releases from Attorney General Barr relevant to these investigations, so we'll have to wait and see. But I want to see somebody who wants to expose the fraud that allowed our intelligence agencies to go along with the Democrat report of Russian attack on our country and did not verify it with our own very capable, excellent forensics teams. There's another piece of this which has also not gotten exposure, and that is that there exists evidence that demonstrates this could not have been a hack from somewhere else across the internet. One, if this were the case, the NSA has all the information because the NSA tracks all these computer trails. I'm not using the technical language because I don't know it, but the fact is the NSA, if there's a hack going to the DNC and coming out again, there is a path that the NSA is able to capture and can present as evidence. That has not happened, but there is further evidence that's been developed by a team led by a man named William Binney, who was a technical director at NSA, who actually developed many of the metadata collection systems that are still in place. He was a whistleblower because they were so unconstitutional. At a certain point, he steps out after 30 years at NSA. But what he and his team have done is they've taken these releases, emails, and so on, and actually done a study on the timestamps. And what they determined is that they were coming out too rapidly to be anything going over any distance of internet. As anybody knows, if you're trying to download something from a distance, it takes time. This stuff comes out fast. And according to them, it comports with what would be a thumb drive download right there on the spot or some other kind of storage device, which suggests that there was someone inside or had access to being inside and was able to take things out on a thumb drive or some kind of storage device and pass it somehow to WikiLeaks, not that there was a foreign state actor doing this from halfway across the world. So this evidence too should be looked at and examined. It has not been. So we've had a suppression of evidence. We've had this phony evidence. Fortunately, Barr seems to be someone who's playing along with this narrative.
This is West. Miss West.
Yes.
Along that line, Seth Rich. That was there's two big events that have not had any closure.
Right.
Seth Rich and the Las Vegas massacre.
Right.
And both of them, they have the fingerprints of the the federal investigations committees. Now, with Coates stepping down and Radcliffe stepping in, now you have three of the three musketeers. They're out. Clapper and the other clown and Coates.
Right.
With those guys moving out, even if Barr is not, if he's complicit or if he's a non-participant, I think now things can be done, especially with William Binney being kind of quarterbacking all the things from the outside,
Right.
because he when they raided him, that was really the ultimate slap.
It was. No, you're exactly right. No, and that is cause for being open to being positive. I've just become such a cynic. But no, you're exactly right. That was a very positive step to get rid of Coates. Ratcliffe is surely an improvement. Absolutely right. Seth Rich must be investigated. Julian Assange must be called as a witness. I mean, Julian Assange, publisher of WikiLeaks, now in a maximum security prison for nothing in England, facing extradition to the United States. I hope he is not extradited. You have him sitting there having been a witness directly involved in how WikiLeaks received this information. They receive all these information, and we have heard the story that his lawyer sought immunity at a certain point early in 2017 in exchange for testimony, and that this was quashed by then FBI Director James Comey. So, I mean, this is something that needs to be revisited. In the meantime, we have seen Julian Assange called a Russian agent by Donald Trump's then CIA Director, Mike Pompeo, who basically said he was WikiLeaks was I believe it was a hostile non-state intelligence agency used by foreign adversaries, including Russia, something like that. This was based, again, on DNC junk. This was based on the CrowdStrike report that claimed there was Russian hacking and that the emails were given by Russia to WikiLeaks. DNC, no independent investigation. And of course, the Steele dossier, which more people are aware of, is more notorious, I think, if people understand that was a concoction by the DNC. So you have this fraudulent cycle that all comes down to these fraudulent documents that essentially were laundered by the intelligence agencies, the FBI, Department of National Homeland Security, and so on. The FISA court also made its spying warrants available based on these same documents. I mean, there's no end to the damage that these, essentially, you can think of them as forgeries in a way, that these forgeries have created, having been laundered through the government, intelligence, and security agencies. So this too has to be opened up. Notice there's no mention of Assange, there's certainly no mention of Rich, and there's no mention that there is this certainly alternate evidence to the Russian hack, and no mention in even the Mueller hearings last week. I was so disappointed. Republicans did not bring up the fact that there is no evidence to support the claim that Russia hacked the election. So there's a lot of things to be unspooled at this point, and I hope that we see that done.
Miss West, what about the Awan brothers? The Awan brothers, that's a huge leak that we have from the back doors of all either computers, routers, just take your pick. And this is a leak that continues to share freely all of our most deepest secrets. And yet nobody has done anything to bring, Pakistan and the ISI to task. This is a huge problem.
Correct, a huge problem. And of course, the brothers had Debbie Wasserman Schultz's password. She, of course, was at the time DNC chairman and all the rest of it. I mean, this is a huge part of the story, too, that was quashed. At the time, the investigation in Congress was quashed by then Speaker Paul Ryan. So we see, again, this sort of uniparty effort to protect the swamp. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's incredible the amount of scandal that has been suppressed with these truly nefarious and evidenceless conspiracy theories spun out of nothing that have become conventional wisdom, that are repeated over and over again, whether it's by Hollywood stars doing these videos that are floating around, or the media itself, or Congress. Or I was sorry to see, some of this stuff repeated again by Attorney General Barr, or the House Intelligence Committee. I mean, this stuff is poisonous when it's repeated and repeated and repeated. And that, of course, is the big lie technique. And that is, again, something that entered into our world going back to when we had the beginning of mass media, which would be, again, early in the 20th century, and also the tactics of communism, because communists lie. They lie to advance their agenda, and it is foreign. It was foreign to our system, to our morality, to the way that we wanted to live and be. And now it has become, very much part of our subverted nature. We have so much of it all around us. So, I mean, there really has to be such a massive restructuring. It's hard to know where to begin, but it really begins, I think, by just hanging on to the truth as you can find it and trying to spread it. And that goes up and down, in so many different, kind of contexts. It's true.
Diane, if I may ask you a question, it's Mark Sutherland. I actually live in London in the UK, and I'm staying with Mike and Kathy at the moment. And thank you for all that you were saying, the privilege to be able to listen to you. Now, what is absolutely incredible is how you have your swamp that the election of President Trump has revealed, and many of us in the UK were praying for that. What is absolutely fascinating is the tie-up within our fight to actually leave the EU, and that by leaving the EU has revealed our swamp. And then we begin to work out how interconnected all this is. And you've said many amazing things. And the key thing to me, I remember reading the Post-American President by Pamela Geller and Spencer, and the fact that we look at Canada, we see Trudeau, who runs that nation, as a post-nation nation in regard to his thoughts. And then we go back to the UK, and as I was talking about a few days ago, with the fact that we have this group called Common Purpose, and Common Purpose is the left-wing sort of equivalent of the Masons, that runs neuro-linguistic programs in the UK for people to then run our country in a post-nation nation, contributing to the bureaucratic tyranny, which is actually the EU. I will stop, but just to say thank you for your books, all that you have done and are doing, because we are in this global fight across the world, and say that there are a number of people in the UK standing with your nation in this fight.
Oh, well, thank you. That's marvelous to hear, and you're absolutely right. And it is global on these. The Common Purpose also has ties certainly to the whole Fabian movement, which is a go slow socialism kind of movement that a lot of it was British in its beginnings, and very quickly found counterparts in the United States. And I'm talking at the end of the 1800s. I mean, this goes back quite a ways, and we see kind of this blooming of British American socialist front, if you will, certainly by 1900, 1905, and there's great interplay back and forth. And one thing I found, I did a talk on kind of the origins of PC, and it took me back into a lot of this history and a lot of the common British American leftism back in 100 years ago. And one of the things I was really interested in was how these kind of parlor socialists, very middle class people, well-educated people, how they were intertwined at that turn of the 20th century with the people who became known as the Bolsheviks. I mean, they were tied right in with Lenin, literally. They were tied in with people who became Soviet agents. In other words, there's sort of a subterfuge of the reasonable socialists who are in the universities and the law firms and politics, and they seem very normal, even as they're trying to absolutely radicalize your world. And then there are, on the other hand, the bomb throwers, and people tend to separate them, but they have had great intertwining throughout their history. You look at the Frankfurt School, which a lot of people have heard of, which actually I personally think their importance is overstated because there was so much else going on even before they were in translation in America, say in the 40s or 50s or something like that. We already were done, really, in terms of this communist movement. But if you look at them, they were academics. However, a number of them also were later revealed to have been Soviet agents. So there's always the interplay of the bomb thrower or the spy and the parlor socialist. So all of these things intertwine, and certainly Brexit is all part of the Trump movement and others in Europe for quite some time, moving back toward the recreation of the nation state, which I think
Sorry, Diane.
Yes, no, I don't need to go on to, but
I was going to say, no,
yes.
no, absolutely. And then we look at the UK, we look at people like Sydney and Beatrice Webb that started the London School of Economics, and also their involvement with Bernard Shaw, and also their involvement in the Fabian Society. You're absolutely right. And that's what heartens me and literally thank God for the research that you have done. It heartens me and spurs me and others on just to expose all these links that have been going on within our own country and within Europe. I mean, just recently, of course, we've had the whole Five Eyes spy agencies, basically being used by the Obama administration to spy on the Trump campaign, and then complete denial of that officially by government. There'll be a letter maybe one day I'd love to share with you on that front. I'll stop, but just to say thank you very much for just spurring the rest of us on to find out this information across the world.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate your comments. That's very nice. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I want to once again, I want to thank you for the information. I want to second something that you were saying. You said that you didn't have terminology for it. So the terminology is this: data transfer rates and timestamps. That's the information that proves that Seth Rich used a USB to transfer the data, and it wasn't transferred over a network. It was absolutely impossible to do. There's one method to do, and I guarantee you, idiots like Imran Awan did not know that because he's a paper tech. He doesn't know anything about computers except what he learned in the brain dump. So thank you very much. Also, I just wanted to second, just you're absolutely solid on that. And one other thing, I wish would stop going, what does Trump do to do something? It's up to us. It's up to us to do that. It's up to us to demand justice and make our voices heard. So thanks again. I love it. Love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's exactly true. It is up to us to demand justice.
Miss Diana,
Yes.
I was gonna just leave you with one thought. I was checking out the ties between Hitler and the United States, and so if you go to Cold Springs Harbor Laboratory, this is something that might give some evidence, because right there, Margaret Sanger, she had a lot of ties to that, and then she was diametrically opposed to Hitler. Yet, as your research goes further, they seem to to become interwoven, and that's where it really gets kind of tricky. When you were talking about back in the early 1900s, that's actually where all the cattle barons, they started to change into this globalist mindset, and that's where the socialists started to be set up so that they could permeate the religious institutions and the schools, because that's where we have our biggest problem. They've planted the seed, and it's very, very hard to get it broken away. Either you stop all education and you stop all religious institutions, but we can't, because then you step on to gaslighting. Consular Robert Barnes was saying that right now, this is the epitome of gaslighting. They keep repeating the lie over and over and over. And for the people that are feeble-minded, that are weak, they will believe anything. And when you do that, this is just it's hypnosis to its nth degree. It just makes them do whatever they want. Thank you.
Right. Well, it's brainwashing, which is a term that comes right out of the communist takeover of China back in the late 1940s and 50s. brainwashing is a tactic. It comes out of Pavlov, the Soviet scientist. I mean, this kind of conditioning and getting emotional responses from certain prompts and things like that. All these things have been refined and entrenched. And so, yes, it's a big problem. But there are so many people who are waking up to and who have been doing their own studies. So many on the call, and it is within our grasp, I think. But it is hard. It is a hard task.
Hi, Diana.
Yes.
Hi, this is Kathy. I'm getting questions from Facebook. So I have a listener that would like to know if you've heard of Q and what you think about it.
I have heard of Q, and I've read some of Q, but I'm not a devotee. I don't have a big stake in that. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions in the queue? Very good questions. Diana, thank you for your patience in answering all of those questions. One of the things that I'd like to discuss is our inability as a nation to ask the tough questions. And I know that you really tackled this in your book, The Death of the Grown-Up. But would you, for our listeners, go through this? Why can't we, as a nation, have an honest conversation and dialogue about communism and the fact that it is entrenched in our government and how it is antithetical to our founding fathers and the founding documents and what we stand for as a republic? What is the real issue, Diana, in your opinion?
Well, I think that it goes to the infiltration, if you will, or the takeover, the seizure of education, certainly, the media. I mean, it becomes very difficult for people to break through the simple peer pressure that they feel in their various professional milieu, and certainly in schools there's such conditioning and brainwashing going on in terms of what is available. The academy itself has censored and cast out any dissent. I mean, one thing when I was writing American Betrayal that was shocking to me were how closely our system had evolved along Soviet lines in terms of the prejudice against free thought, against the way people are cast out of circles, academic circles. They don't make tenure. I mean, these things, once you get communists or pro-communists into positions of power, they replicate themselves. And I think that's why it's so important to go back to the 1930s to understand how it started, because you start seeing the desks manned by these anti-American people who then simply replicate themselves. And so this makes it very difficult for people to say, I mean, when I was writing American Betrayal and Stan Evans read it in manuscript, he told me, you're going to be attacked for what you say about Joseph McCarthy and quite a lot of other things as well. But he focused in on what I said about Joseph McCarthy. And, I told him bring it on, basically, which he liked to hear. But I mean, honestly, I felt that way. But it was a big deal for me to join Stan in supporting or going back to the record and trying to set right the wrong that has been done to Senator McCarthy and try to set right the wrong that's been done to our understanding of our history, because it isn't said, it isn't done. And so you have to buck that mentality. And it's hard for people. People are, they have their careers to worry about. They want to have friends. I mean, these have become very, maybe signs of weakness in our age, but they're very prevalent. And I think that's part of the reason, or that is the reason, we end up with these incredibly shallow, truncated discussions of what's happened to us. And we have to bust out of it, because it's essential, but it doesn't really matter, once you say it. And I think that's part of the genius of Donald Trump, and part of his gift to the Western world, is he says things, he doesn't care, he fights back, and the world is still revolving. I mean, he has broke through so many paradigms and so many restrictions that, you know, for that alone, he has changed, I think, political discourse for the better. Most people would say, oh, he's coarsened it, etc. But I mean, frankly, we were already pretty coarse. So, you know, this is what you have to speak out, and that is really something he's demonstrated time and time and again.
Yes, and this is a word of rebuke toward Christians specifically who take issue with President Trump saying that, well, he's coarse, or he says this, or he says that. Here's what I would say to you. President Trump speaks his mind, whether you agree with it or not. That's not the point. He speaks his mind, and I would much rather have someone who speaks their mind than that silver fox tongued, split forked tongue nonsense that we were subject to for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
And that's my personal opinion. Maybe that's a short op-ed piece, Diana.
No, it's so true, though. I mean, it's absolutely. Look at Baltimore. No one was talking about how just horrible the conditions are in Baltimore until Donald Trump brought it up. Now you have Democrats standing up for this horrible city, and you know, Al Sharpton is being upheld again as a Democratic leader. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of funny actually, but it's true. He shines his little flashlight on everything from the Clintons to Baltimore to everything in between. So it's he really shows the way to speaking out.
Yeah. And anytime any group, city, organization would hold up Al Sharpton as an example of truth, you know that they're insane.
Right.
That's craziness. Okay, we are down to just a couple of minutes, Diane, and I sure appreciate your time. One of the things that I've noticed is it seems to me that the same strategies, the same methodologies that have been used for the last 6 decades or more, 7 decades, to silence those that would try to expose communism and how it has infiltrated our government, has also been used against us when it comes to Islam. Is that not the case in your
Yes.
view too?
Absolutely. I mean, we started American Betrayal trying to understand how we could tell so many lies about Islam, because I'd been an editorial writer and columnist, you know, in the post 9/11 period, and really came up against that restriction. And I actually became interested in figuring out how we got to this point where we couldn't even have a grown-up conversation about Islam, which really led to the death of the grown-up, and then took another whack at it in American Betrayal. Well, we were just as craven and dishonest about communism as we are today about Islam. And that became kind of the genesis of this sort of exploration I was on.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Folks, I've been talking with Diana West. Thank you for all of the great questions. Those of you in the huddle, I appreciate that. The book, folks, you can go to dianawest.net and you can order it there. You can go to Amazon, American Betrayal, The Secret Assault on Our Nation's Character. Be sure to support our sponsors, Life Vantage, that is Micah 68, MIKA 68 /lifevantage.com. Check it out, folks. We appreciate it. We'll be back next week with another fantastic guest. Diana, thank you so much for joining us again here on the live show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. And thanks
Folks,
to everyone.
you're very welcome. Remember, renewing our mind is not an option. I'll see you next Monday. God bless you.